Here we have an outline of tonight's schedule. We'll be reviewing some background information on official plans in general before jumping into a review of the relevant sections from the draft official plan. Then we'll wrap up with our next steps once this series of open houses is complete. So this might be a bit of repeat information for those of you who watched last week's presentation, but we want to make sure that everyone in attendance has a basic understanding of how the planning system works. Planning in Ontario follows a hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy, we have the Planning Act, which is a provincial legislation that sets out the ground rules for land use planning in Ontario. It describes how land uses may be controlled and who may control them. It provides the basis for considering provincial interests, the preparation of official plans, makes available tools that municipalities can use, and establishes the basis for the division of land. The Provincial Policy Statement, which is issued under Section 3 of the Planning Act, is a consolidated statement of the provincial government's policies on land use planning. It provides direction on a number of issues, including the efficient use of land and infrastructure, the provision of sufficient housing, and the protection of the environment and resources. These provincial policies are then implemented through municipal official plans. A Place to Grow, Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, or more commonly known as the Growth Plan, is a regional growth management document that applies to the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which is an area that includes the Peterborough region and wraps around Lake Ontario from Niagara Falls through to and including Northumberland County. The Growth Plan is issued under Section 7 of the Places to Grow Act and is the Ontario government's initiative to plan for growth and development. It builds on the policy foundation provided by the PPS and provides more specific land use planning policies to address issues faced by municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoes. Like the PPS, the policies of the Growth Plan are to be implemented through municipal official plans. The county's draft official plan must conform to and be consistent with these pieces of provincial legislation. Municipal official plans are required to be reviewed and updated periodically. This is called a municipal comprehensive review. Since the current county official plan is somewhat dated and has undergone a number of amendments over the years, it was determined that the county would benefit from the development of a new official plan. This would not only help clarify or correct certain policies in the current OP, but also provide the opportunity to create a document that is more user-friendly. As part of this process, the official plan is also being brought into conformity with the most recent versions of the Provincial Policy Statement and Growth Plan. In addition to containing county-wide policies, the new county official plan will also serve as the local official plan for the townships of Asphodel Norwood, Darrow-Dummer, Havelock, Belmont, Methuen, North Kawartha, Otonabee, South Monaghan, Selwyn, and Trent Lakes. Once the new OP is approved by the province, those townships that currently maintain their own official plans will repeal their documents. The province has mapped a natural heritage system for the Greater Golden Horseshoe that is intended to support a comprehensive, integrated, and long-term approach to planning for the protection of the region's natural heritage and biodiversity. This mapping does not apply until it's implemented in the county official plan, where it is required by the Growth Plan to be incorporated as an overlay. This overlay would provide an additional layer of protection and review over areas that are not included in the system. We do have an opportunity to refine the NHS now at the time of initial implementation of the mapping. Once it's been incorporated into the OP, it can only be further refined through a municipal comprehensive review. Here we can see the natural heritage system as mapped by the province. Peterborough County has been highlighted in red, and the NHS is shown on the map here in the dark green color. As you can see, the northern end of the county is completely within the NHS with connectivity to the south end of the county and by extension the rest of the Growth Plan area through linkages provided along select rivers, waterways, and natural heritage features. The natural heritage system can currently be seen in greater detail from our public GIS site or through Land Information Ontario. Our Technical Advisory Committee for the official plan has supported the proposed refinement to the Provincial Natural Heritage System, which utilizes mapping through the Kawartha's Naturally Connected project, and you might hear me refer to that as the KNC project going forward. The KNC project and associated mapping was developed locally and involved county, all 8 local municipalities, and local First Nations communities, as well as numerous other stakeholder groups, including staff from the Ministry of Natural Resources. It was scientifically produced and vetted with consideration given to several regional priorities such as environmental, economic, and social significance. As well, both the Greater Peterborough Area Sustainability Plan and the Climate Change Action Plan have recommended leveraging the natural heritage system produced through the KNC project. Our proposal to use the K&C mapping as the refinement to the provincial natural heritage system was submitted to the province for initial review and consideration in late 2020. Although the mapping met the criteria outlined in the Natural Heritage Reference Manual, the province was not supportive of the locally produced mapping completely replacing the provincial mapping. The province has indicated that more coverage is needed, and county staff continue to work with township staff and the province to find a balance that is agreeable to all parties. It is likely that the final version of the Natural Heritage System to be included in the new OP will be a hybrid of both the K&C and provincial mapping. Given the extent of the NHS coverage across the county, it's important to understand the impact of that mapping on development proposals. So as I mentioned earlier, the Natural Heritage System will be implemented as an overlay, so will work in conjunction with the underlying land use designation and any policies applicable to nearby natural heritage features. New development that takes place inside the Natural Heritage System overlay will be required to address an additional list of criteria over and above all other requirements. This includes demonstrating connectivity along the system between key features, limiting the removal of natural features that are not identified as key features, a limitation on the disturbed area of the site and on impervious surfaces, and the requirement that a percentage of the developable area remain as self-sustaining vegetation. Another item to be aware of is that key natural heritage features such as significant woodlands or habitat of endangered and threatened species are provided with a higher level of protection within the Natural Heritage System compared to areas outside the system. Within the NHS, development is not permitted within these areas or within their protection zones. It should be noted, however, that the Natural Heritage System overlay will not extend into identified settlement areas, as they will be the focus for growth and development. In addition to the natural heritage system we've discussed, natural heritage features across the county will be protected through policies in the draft official plan. These policies have come directly from the growth plan and provincial policy statement. Key natural heritage features, as defined by the growth plan, have a broader definition than the language that is used in the provincial policy statement. Key natural heritage features include habitat of endangered and threatened species, fish habitat, wetlands, life science areas of natural and scientific interest, significant valley lands, significant woodlands, and significant wildlife habitat, to name a few. In the draft official plan, we have defined each of these features and provide a policy direction depending on whether it is inside or outside of the Natural Heritage System overlay. Very generally, features that are inside of the Natural Heritage System are subject to growth plan policies, and features that are outside of the Natural Heritage System or are in an identified settlement area are subject to PPS policies. The draft OP has tried to combine the provincial policies from both the growth plan and PPS so that it is easier to read and understand. Wetlands are the exception to these rules because they fall into two categories. They're both a key natural heritage feature and a key hydrologic feature as defined in the growth plan. The policies for key hydrologic features are more restrictive, meaning that they apply everywhere regardless as to whether they are inside or outside of the Natural Heritage System overlay. The growth plan policies also do not differentiate between provincially significant wetlands, locally significant wetlands, or non-evaluated wetlands. They're all treated as equally important. The policies of the draft OP have recognized this provincial requirement and have provided direction for wetlands inside and outside of settlement areas. Generally speaking, development is not permitted within natural heritage features or their vegetation protection zones when they're located within the natural heritage system. In many circumstances, the vegetation protection zone is a minimum of 30 meters, but some features require this buffer area to be determined through the study. Appendix G to the draft OP provides recommended vegetation protection zones for various natural heritage features. The image on the slide here illustrates what a 30-meter vegetation protection zone looks like on a map. It's simply a 30-meter vegetated buffer around the feature. Environmental studies are required when development is proposed within 120 meters of a natural heritage feature. The study must demonstrate that there will be no negative impacts on the features and may provide mitigation measures to be implemented to ensure the natural heritage feature is not impacted. Policies of the draft OP include a brief terms of reference for these studies, which must be submitted together with the development application, such as a severance application, and are peer-reviewed by either conservation authority having jurisdiction or a peer review consultant working on behalf of the county or township. Recommendations of the studies can be implemented through agreements registered untitled or through the use of planning tools such as zoning or site plan control. So now we're moving on to the natural hazards section of the draft OP. Like most of the content we've discussed already tonight, much of the policy direction for natural hazards come from the provincial planning documents. Natural hazards are naturally occurring processes that have potential to render lands unsafe for development. This includes lands that are prone to flooding, erosion, or wildfire hazards, and we generally want to direct development away from these areas. Wildfires are the second most frequent type of reported natural disaster in Canada, next to flooding. For this reason, the province has implemented policies to prevent and mitigate risks posed to life and property from wildfires. Wildfire hazard mapping has been provided by the province and is a new tool to be implemented through the draft official plan. The mapping identifies areas with high to extreme risk of fire hazard. The policies of the PPS require development to avoid these areas, and, where it cannot be avoided, a wildland fire assessment is required. The assessment is intended to outline how the risk will be mitigated, and these measures may be implemented through planning tools such as site plan control or zoning. As within the environmental studies we just discussed, the draft policy provides a brief terms of reference for wildfire assessments. Floodplain mapping is a tool used to protect and respect the floodplain and helps to protect property and human life. Currently, floodplains have been delineated around several major lakes and waterways across the county by local conservation authorities. In accordance with the provincial policy statement, the policies of the draft official plan direct development to areas outside of lands which are impacted by flooding hazards, including areas that are rendered inaccessible during times of flooding. The Otonabee Region Conservation Authority is currently going through the process of delineating or updating floodplain mapping for a number of waterways within the county, including Mead Creek, the Lakefield tributaries, the Ouse River, Jackson, Baxter, and Curtis Creeks. Although floodplains will remain restricted for development by the PPS, we are hopeful that this mapping can be included in the draft official plan as best available information before the plan is adopted by County Council and sent to the province for approval. The Conservation Authority is currently undertaking a public information period that will run through until April 9th, and we would encourage anyone interested to visit the Conservation Authority's website for more information on these projects. The Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan is an ecologically based plan established by the Ontario government to provide land use and resource management direction for the land and water within the moraine. The plan was originally established in 2002 and was most recently updated in 2017. The moraine includes the southwestern portion in the township of Cavan-Monaghan. The county's draft official plan includes policies throughout that provide direction in line with the policies of the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan for development on the moraine in the township of Cavan-Monaghan. We recognize that these policies need to be modified to provide a broader policy framework since the township of Cavan-Monaghan has opted out of the draft OP. Any revisions to the Oak Ridges Moraine section of the draft official plan will likely consolidate the policies into a single section and provide a slightly broader policy framework with further detail to be provided in the township's official plan. All policies in both the county official plan and the township's official plan must conform to the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan. So that concludes the policy review part of our presentation for tonight. Please visit the county's website for a number of resources you may find helpful, including a full copy of the draft official plan, together with land use schedules for 7 townships, all of the focus reports and update reports that have been provided to County Council, and background information and guidelines for both the provincial agricultural system and the provincial natural heritage system. As was noted at the beginning of the presentation, we have 2 additional open houses being hosted after tonight, and the dates of each are on the slide. Once we have wrapped up the open houses, we'll be revising the draft official plan and making updates to reflect comments that were received as part of the consultation process. The second draft will then be released for public review prior to hosting a public meeting with County Council. A date for the public meeting has not yet been scheduled, but if you wish to be notified of when this will take place, please ensure you have either subscribed to our webpage or have got your name on our notification list. Again, if you have any comments you would like to submit in writing, or you would like to register for an upcoming open house or have your name added to the notification list, please feel free to contact us at the email address on the screen. Thank you all very much for your time. Hopefully everybody is still with us. We're going to be jumping into some questions that we received prior to the open house first, before we open the floor. So I can see Ian Attridge, your hand is up. So I will get to you right after we answer these questions. And I haven't had a look in the chat yet.
I was going to say, because people are encouraged also to submit questions in the chat too, and when they come up, we will we'll read them out and answer the questions.
Yep. Yeah, so we received a couple of questions, and then I have just sort of we received a number of comments related to the topic that we covered tonight. So I just kind of wanted to bring those to everyone's attention and then offer a little bit of further comment on it. So the first question we have is the comments and questions being made at the open houses. How is County Council addressing any possible changes to the draft official plan? Is there a process and timeline in place? So our process going forward, and it is all kind of subject to change. We know that this is a public process and it's a political process that it has to go through. So we don't have any set deadlines for the public meeting in that yet. We are trying to meet the deadline of July 1st to get everything into the province. That's the goal that we are working with. But county staff will be categorizing comments and requested changes into several categories, which might include technical, administrative changes, minor changes, and then major changes. And then the intent would be to take a report to County Council after the public meeting and after it's gone through the Technical Advisory Committee, suggesting changes to the OP, but only those that have a significant change or impact. So if there's a typo somewhere, we're obviously not going to bring that to County Council's attention. This would include any major policy or mapping changes that would take the OP in a different direction from what has already been presented in the draft. And again, we don't have any specific date currently established for this. Under the timelines established in the Planning Act, we cannot host a public meeting until at least mid to late May. So that's really the only sort of timeline we have, plus the July 1st deadline. The second question we have is, it's not clear if a condition of consent for severance of a surplus farm dwelling will require a merger agreement registered on title to merge the retained lands with the benefiting farm parcel, as has been done in the past. So this question relates to some topics that we covered at last week's open house. Currently, the draft OP policy states that new residential dwellings will be prohibited on the remnant parcel through rezoning. But that does not prohibit or prevent a municipality from requiring a merger agreement as a condition of consent if that is their direction. So I think the answer is pretty short on that. The next question we have is in section 3.5 consents for surplus farm dwellings, that it requires the residential dwelling to be severed. It must have existed before July 1st, 2017. How was this date determined? Again, this was a topic that was covered last week when we talked about the agricultural land use designation and consent policies. The date of July 1st, 2017 comes from the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. So when we developed the policy, we were including the township of Cabin-Monaghan, and portions of that township are subject to the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. So originally it started off that it was only going to be on the moraine that date, but then through discussions, we talked at TAC a number of times about the agricultural severance policies, and we decided to carry the date forward. It seemed to make sense to have a date that prevents somebody from building a house today with the sole intent of severing it tomorrow, which would be fragmenting the farmland through that surplus dwelling policy. So rather than trying to establish some sort of arbitrary date for all the other municipalities, we just decided that that date from the conservation plan was already in effect, and it would create consistency among the municipalities to carry that forward. And then the last thing, I just thought I would make note that we have received a number of comments from a number of different people that have been related to the protection of the environment. That was echoed in our conversations at last week's open house, though we know there was very strong support for protection of wetlands and shorelands in particular, and the role that they play in mitigating the effects of climate change and maintaining or improving our water quality. So hopefully this presentation has provided a bit better picture of what the policies are around the environment in the county. The creation of new lots within or adjacent to many of the natural heritage features is not permitted, and that includes wetlands. That policy environment isn't just being introduced into the OP. It's not something that's new necessarily. It's in effect today through the growth plan, and they've been implemented since 2019. So with time, we should be able to see the full effect of those policies. It's a little trickle down effect. It'll take a little bit of time before we start seeing some results. With shoreline development, we aren't seeing as many new lots being created as we used to. Those opportunities are becoming less and less, and then even more so with the release of the new policies and legislation in the last couple of years. I think the concern lies with redevelopment of existing lots, and it's hard to capture that in official plan policy because no matter how hard you try, I don't think it's ever going to cover every specific situation. You want the policy to be firm enough that the lake remains protected, but then again, you want it to be flexible enough to allow those redevelopments and minor additions to take place. So going forward, it might be the case that we have to reevaluate the use of some of our planning tools like zoning or site plan, and even start maybe exploring some other options that are available under the Planning Act and the Municipal Act to regulate development on the shoreline. Yeah, so I guess that would be my comment on those comments. So I will open the floor now to anybody in attendance. You can either just raise your hand on the camera like so, or if you want to, you can type it in the chat, or yeah, Ian's got the idea, you can raise it virtually. So Ian, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks very much. Oh, I'll put my video on here. That makes it easy. Thanks very much for the presentation, for your work on natural heritage. A couple of questions. One is pretty quick. What is a good date to get comments in? I've been looking for that to get a sense of timing. Obviously, the sooner the better, and not too late after to the public meeting. But what's a really good date in order to be able to feed that into your staff work and the technical advisory committee? And my second question is about evaluation of features, natural features that have that perhaps don't have an existing circle around them. So I noticed, I think the second paragraph of 6.3 on natural heritage was representing or referencing prairies and alvars, for example, as significant features that haven't necessarily been evaluated, but are very rare in the province, and some of them exist here in the county. And so what is the process for evaluation of those kinds of features? So those are my questions for the moment. Thanks very much.
So for your first question, you're not the first person to ask for a deadline. We don't have a specific date set right now. I would just say that if you can get them to us before end of April, that would be great. That way we can incorporate any of those comments into any draft that we bring forward for a public meeting and for county council's consideration. We can still accept them right up until the date of adoption, but obviously the sooner you get them in, the better, as you said. Other features, so yeah, like we don't have any identified prairies or alvars that I'm aware of. They would be captured under just the term key natural heritage feature, or in the PPS, they fall under significant, I forget what the exact term that PBS uses, but there is a term. So we would just capture those through those policies, and I would rely on an environmental study to identify those specifically if they were found on a site.
I think just to supplement that, Ian, I think there's rarely an application that comes through our door now that isn't accompanied by an environmental impact study. As you can see from the mapping we're dealing with from the province, which is actually more, provides more coverage than the KNC mapping. That's not as accurate in our opinion, as you well know. the terms of reference as contained in our OP with respect to EIS environmental impact studies, sorry for the acronym, should bode well to capture those features as well.
I guess there are some mapping that M&R and various partners have done of Alvars and Perrys in the county, and I can share those with you if you'd like.
Okay, yep, that'd be great, thank you.
Yeah, and we would also hope that, you know, our mapping will be reviewed by the province through their one window and go to Minister of Natural Resources. So any mapping errors or enhancement would be up as well too. But yeah, we'd be happy to receive that information, Ian.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, and I can see in the chat here, why did the province reject the NHS proposal in December, and why do you believe the current proposal will have a different result? So I'll start off, and then Ian, I see you've unmuted yourself, so you'll probably want to jump in too. So the province, I think it did meet the requirements of the Natural Heritage Reference Manual, which is a provincial guidance document that we have to follow. Overall, I think it didn't meet all of the provincial objectives. I think they're looking for more coverage. They're looking for their provincial interests to be looked after. And I just don't know if perhaps they didn't specifically say this, but I'm just assuming that because we did do the KNC project with Northumberland, or no, sorry, not Northumberland, Cora. What am I trying to say? City of Kawartha Lakes. Thank you. So we tried to coordinate that approach, but it's not necessarily tied into municipalities that are further south of us either. So they did want to see a little bit more coverage in the Peterborough area.
Yeah, so I would just add to that the KNC mapping project that we were involved in a number of years ago, the intent of that ultimately was that we were going to pull that mapping, that natural heritage solution into the county official plan update. The province then in 2017 came out with the new growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which was re-released again in 2019 when the Conservative government took over. But they were the first ones in 2017 to introduce the natural heritage system throughout the whole Greater Golden Horseshoe. We have continuously had dialogue with the province that we worked with them because MNRF was a partner, as were a number of conservation authorities, First Nations, a number of Ducks Unlimited, Parks Canada. There was a number of groups involved in the creation of that KNC mapping, and it had been ground truth to some extent, utilizing Trent University. And so we thought we had a really good product there, and we went back to the province and asked that they consider utilizing it. It was a local solution, and we thought it was good work. And end result was they took that information, they went back to their various committees at the provincial level to determine whether or not they would open the door a crack to let us use that. They came back and said it just didn't support the provincial initiatives enough under the growth plan. So we have had ongoing, I guess the second part of the question that was in the chat was how, why do we think that the new one has a better chance? And I guess the short answer to that is we've continued to meet with MNRF staff and Ministry of Natural Resources staff, as well as Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And we have floated a couple of different ideas past them. One is to look at existing areas that, rural settlement areas, crossroads, those types of areas where there's already some development exists, and whether or not we can sort of net those areas out or in and around those areas. Because it's recognized that in the north, when the entire north part of the county is shaded green, obviously we're still looking at growth within those communities. So we're trying to work with the ministry and the local municipalities to identify some areas that we think could be identified and could be taken out. So they have advised that they're open to that. Obviously, they want to see the extent of that mapping. we have reached out to local municipalities and requested their assistance in identifying some of those areas. So that's, I guess, is one of those stay tuned. We have to still continue that discussion with the province and hopefully be able to refine the mapping a little bit more. Ultimately, it requires the approval of the province. So no matter what we submit, the province ultimately has final say in what that mapping will look like.
Thanks for that. Oh, there's just a follow-up comment. MNRF itself does not recognize the NHS mapping in the north, 100% coverage for some of its own funding programs. Noted. Is there anyone else that has any questions? You can either just type it right in the chat, raise your hand. I'm trying to scroll through a couple of pages of faces. See, Will and Bernadette have their mic off. Do you, oh no, they muted. Oh no, they're still on. Do you have a question, Will and Bernadette, or no? Can go with no. Oh, Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm wondering about the deadline of July for production of the comprehensive plan. I mean, is there wiggle room there, or what are the consequences of not producing the plan by that date? I mean, given obviously that there's an election coming up. And I mean, also just given, I mean, it sounds like everything is under a tight deadline, and it's a lot of like wait and see and get your, you know, comments in as soon as possible. I mean, I wonder if anyone can speak to the tightness of that deadline and what happens if the municipality just decides not to meet that deadline.
Yeah. So the province has set that deadline. That is a deadline to implement the growth plan policies. They did send a letter out a number of months ago, maybe even been a year or more ago, where they said that they were not offering any extensions and municipalities are expected to meet that deadline. As for what happens if we don't meet that deadline, there's really no direct consequences. There is the province could, in theory, take approval authority away from the county for official plan amendments or other approval authorities that we are given. Whether or not they would do that, I don't know. But yeah, I guess Ian or Brian, do you want to offer any other comment on it?
Yeah, I can start. They haven't actually said, Katie, what the consequences might be. However, we know that the municipal sphere is broad and all-encompassing, and it goes well beyond planning, land use planning, when it comes to areas of jurisdiction, funding, applications. So we don't know. We don't want to put ourselves in the position of having to bear the consequences of not meeting that deadline. As I say, we don't know what they are, but it could be very well at the extreme, take away some of our planning authority. That would be very extreme. However, we don't know what considerations the province makes when it's considering funding or grant proposals and disbursements. As I said, we don't want to find that out. We have had the official plan out since January, and we really did feel that putting it out to the public in January is sufficient time to get comments in, feedback, make the changes, and have it adopted by County Council before the beginning of July.
I see some questions in the chat here. Jim Patterson, if that's the Jim Patterson that I know. Hello, Jim. Is your presentation slides available to us? You want to tackle that, Si?
Yes, they will be made available. So both the recording and the slide deck will be posted on the county's website. So you can just, where the official plan schedule is posted, there's a link right beside it that you can access those. They will be up maybe later this week or early next week.
Okay, and the next question we have from, again, Fiona, have you considered creating a new zoning or classification for conservation group owned properties? Like, for example, Kawartha Land Trust, where conservation protection is the primary goal. I think the quick answer to this is that zoning is a township responsibility. So as required under the Planning Act, when this new official plan is completed, each of the municipalities have, I believe, the way it's stipulated in the Planning Act, they have 2 years to update their zoning bylaws. So I would imagine pretty much all the municipalities will be going through an update to their zoning bylaw at that point in time. So you'd want to engage in that.
I would just add that the lands that are owned by a conservation authority or a conservation group like Kawartha Land Trust, we have identified them on the land use schedules as being within a Parks and Conservation land use designation as well. So they are recognized through the OP, so they can be zoned appropriately.
Right. Okay, the next question is, how does one get a natural heritage site designation, for example, to date, an unrecognized fish spawning site? Thank you. So we get all that information from the Ministry of Natural Resources. It's a mapping layer that we received from them. So if you get a hold of us offline, we could connect you with Ministry of Natural Resources staff, and possibly they could assist with looking at that and evaluating it and updating any mapping if it meets their requirements, and then it would be pushed out to us through that mechanism. Another question, will provisions be made within the proposed OP to incorporate an agreed upon natural heritage system if nothing is ready at the time of the deadline?
I can start with that. I think we, as Ian mentioned, we are still in talks with the ministry and with the province to refine our natural heritage system overlay. The way I think, so if we have not agreed upon something by the time it's ready for adoption, we will put in what we think is appropriate. If the province does not agree with that, usually the system usually the way it works is that whenever the province, excuse me, is considering making changes to our adopted official plan, they will actually engage in conversations with us. So there's the opportunity to continue that dialogue. So whether it's a mapping change or whether it's a policy change of any nature, not necessarily NHS, but if they want something in our plan that we didn't put in or want to change something, they will come back with a proposed list of modifications to our plan, and we will sit down and meet and go over that and take it back to council and provide the province with our position on that.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And we've got a comment, good to see technical consents that allow conservation severances. Yeah, that's the policy that we added through discussion with the Kawartha Land Trust. We have run into situations where they have wanted to acquire pieces of property to protect them, and they just sort of headbutted with some of the policies that were in place, even though they're ultimately trying to protect the feature. So we've added some language in our severance policies that we're hopeful the province will be supportive of, that would allow for creation of lots to protect these types of features that would be in the ownership of a example of land trust. We have a comment, don't believe fish spawning sites are recognized as natural heritage sites features. We'd have to double check that. Okay, the recommended 30-meter buffer zone green vegetation mapping could be quite difficult in areas like shoreline residential where many existing cottages are surrounded by forest. And when the mapping is done, will likely be inside or adjacent this zone. How will growth and changes in these areas be dealt with? Is this for local zoning? Does anybody want to tackle that one? Just trying to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is the 30-meter vegetation protection zone around natural heritage features. So in shoreline areas, yeah, so development in those areas, the official plan is, so for lot creation, first of all, there are specific policies for lot creation around, like in the waterfront areas, in the waterfront residential designation. If that overlaps with some of those vegetation protection zones, then we would just have to follow the applicable policy. So sometimes you can't, there's just no, the policy is pretty clear. You can't put development in those areas. If you're looking at development on an, excuse me, an existing lot of record, pardon me, then it would fall to zoning to regulate that. Yeah, I don't know if that fully answers the question or not.
Yeah, thank you. Apologize, the presentation went very quickly, and I think what I was writing, the green vegetated, I just remember that it was green on the map, and I'm here at Big Cedar Lake Association, and I'm interested in how the changes to this will both facilitate the conservation of everything that we love about the lake, but also, you know, just wondering how much more complex it's going to make the day-to-day, you know, bumping out an addition or doing this or that. The sense was that from a couple of people who asked me questions, they had read the 30-meter and they wondered if it was going to become like the 30-meter from the water setback where you're really not allowed to do anything in it. And that could be quite difficult.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And that is something that we even historically have struggled with, is that, you know, even the 30-meter water setback, for example, and doing those additions or putting a deck up or an accessory structure, whatever it is. We have tried to put some recognition that there will be situations where there is existing development inside those 30-meter vegetation protection zones. And in those cases, it's just, you try to do the best you can with what you have is generally the policy direction.
Yeah, I guess was the sense is there going to be wiggle room, or is the 30-meter going to be written as a kind of hard line?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the site, because even though on our mapping it might look like that 30-meter vegetation protection zone is there, when you actually go to the site, it might be, you know, the site might be completely cleared. So I think it really is a site, it has to be looked at on a site-by-site basis. I don't know that there's any overall answer I can give you that might satisfy you.
The other thing that, sorry, the other thing that I might add is that these triggers in the official plan lots of times are triggered by an actual Planning Act application. So if someone was applying for a severance or applying for a rezoning, or if there was a plan of subdivision, that's when a lot of these policies kick in. So knowing Big Cedar Lake, there's a lot of shoreline development there. I don't think there's a great deal of vacant land left. I might stand corrected, but
it's about 50% crown land. It's quite right. Lovely, actually.
Yeah. So for people who are looking at doing some sort of redevelopment, they can redevelop their lot as long as they comply with the existing zoning standards. That's essentially the applicable law, the black and white as far as what you can and can't do on your property. So that's still available to people. Existing lots of record that have an existing cottage, if people want to do an expansion, all of that's covered off through the municipal zoning bylaw. Okay,
Thank you for your clarity.
no problem. We have another one in the chat here. Can you tell me if the provincial fish sanctuary on Nogies Creek is designated?
Under the heritage mapping.
Right.
I would have to get back to you on that, I think.
Yeah, we'll check into that. I would assume that if it's provincial property, it's likely under a designation that provides full protection, but we will certainly check on that. I'm not sure if Keziah has Janet's iPad email to get back to her, but
It's Lois and Tina, I think. I think I have their email.
okay, all right. Well, then we can get back to you.
Oh, that's Janet's iPad. Sorry, not Tina's iPad.
Yeah, Janet's. There's Tina. Yeah, Janet's iPad. So.
If Janet's iPad could just send a direct message. Oh, there you go. I got it.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Ian?
Well, thanks very much. I'm recalling the OMB hearing up on Stony Lake with respect to the development near Burley Falls. And I know that there was some interest from Curve Lake to have a heritage landscape designation in that area. And I can't remember exactly how that all played out in the hearing, but I'm wondering, did that idea or some of its concepts extend back some 50 years to some of the studies that the Trent Severn Waterway had undertaken? And I'm wondering whether there are designations or tools in the proposed plan or potential designations, or maybe even actual designations already in the draft with respect to that and perhaps other significant heritage landscapes. And that relates to really the interaction between the natural and the cultural heritage features, viewscapes, the kind of things that many of us really enjoy about the Kawarthas. So just thinking about that cultural heritage landscape idea.
Yeah, so that's the Fraser property that you're referring to, Ian, right? Yeah. So yeah, there was a lengthy Ontario Municipal Board hearing for a development proposal up there, and the proposal was denied. There was evidence, if I recall, put forward by the First Nations regarding cultural heritage significant landscape, and I'd have to read through the decision again, but I don't believe that the board agreed that it met sort of their tests. Now, what I can tell you, what has come into play since that time of that particular development is the growth plan has stated that in the rural area, so anywhere outside of an identified settlement area, so that includes shorelines, that development is only permitted in areas that were designated as of June of 2006. So that particular property is essentially rural at this point in time. They wouldn't be able to go through an official plan amendment to do a large subdivision or anything like that. The growth plan since it's come in has become quite restrictive, and the idea behind that is twofold. Obviously, to provide some protection in the rural area, and the broader theme of the growth plan is to try and push growth to the settlement areas. So trying to protect natural heritage features, trying to protect agricultural land, and trying to push development to settlement areas. And there's even a hierarchy that it speaks to, trying to have development in fully serviced settlement areas. So we have 4 of those within the county. Next are your rural settlement areas, and then ultimately some growth related through severances. So it's the introduction of the growth plan. We really don't see waterfront development anymore. That used to be, I would say, 90% of the subdivisions that we've dealt with at the county over the last 30 years have predominantly been waterfront subdivisions. And what we're dealing with, or what we're seeing these days, is essentially urban growth. We're processing subdivision applications in our service settlement areas. We've got a 900 lot one processing right now. We've got another 500 lot one. So you're starting to see the impacts of the growth plan and really pushing development through policy to those settlement areas.
I guess I would just ask you to look at some of those scenic characteristics that don't necessarily follow into, say, natural. It may be part of cultural, but those are some elements that really distinguish the Kawarthas and add value to properties in order, and some of the policies that may protect those amenities would be worth looking at, particularly since there have been some suggestions on the North Shore of Stony, and not only on the northwest side, but also on the northeast corner. So, and there may be other places too. So thanks.
In your work, Ian, do you have any examples of that? Anybody that does that currently that we could maybe look at?
I think there are some examples that are around where that aesthetic piece. I think certainly in the United States, we're seeing some examples of where that's brought to the fore, and where perhaps some of the site planning things, or perhaps Ontario Heritage Act designations might be used. I believe even the front grounds of the county courthouse are a heritage landscape designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. So I think looking at that, not necessarily designating all of them, but at least creating the mechanism, the framework for that in the official plan, so that those can be looked at in the future.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah. His iPad has her hand up. You have to unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
I was surprised to discover that the environmental schedules for Duro-Dummer Township and North Kawartha Township hadn't included the provincially significant wetlands data mapping that's been in place for quite a few years. And I know that information has been sent to the county in that regard with up-to-date mapping, but it makes one wonder if there are other mapping of key hydrologic features or natural heritage areas where data is also missing or out of date. Can you assure me that that's not the case?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So that was brought to our attention, and I discussed it with our GIS department because they produced the mapping for us. And my understanding is that there was an overlap of features. I think in some of the wetland cases, there was an overlap between fish spawning areas and wetlands. And when there was an overlap, it was only showing one data set rather than an actual overlap of the two. So it was just like one layer was blocking out another layer. So we do know about that issue, and we will be looking at that. But all of our information is up to date from the Ministry of Natural Resources.
Because the wetland designated areas, the PSW areas, are considerably larger than the fish spawning areas that are marked on the environmental schedules.
Yes, they are. Yeah, and I don't have the technical ability to describe to you how that's happened, but I just know that that's how it was explained to me from our GS department. But we are aware of it, so we are going to be looking at that carefully going forward.
Thank you.
Well, that will be a revision to schedules that we'd be looking at. Right, okay. All right, there's a couple of questions that popped up in the chat here. Does the OP address residual undisturbed shoreline in especially major lakes where most of the shoreline has been impacted by development?
So I would just say the short answer is not directly. The waterfront There is very specific criteria that needs to be met for waterfront development, so it does have to be by infilling now. So in those cases, if you're developing through infilling, generally speaking, those lands are already disturbed, they're already developed. Any undisturbed areas would not meet that infilling criteria.
In addition to that, at our last meeting, we did talk about this a little bit under planning tools. And a couple ways to protect undisturbed shoreline is through the use of site plan control, which is a local township or local municipality responsibility. The other, so when there's redevelopment of a property, the municipality so chooses to implement site plan control on waterfront properties, it would stipulate what vegetation could and could not be removed. The other local responsibility, and it's not under the Planning Act, and that's why you won't necessarily see it under a Planning Act tools section of the official plan, but it's under the Municipal Act. Municipalities have the authority to pass tree preservation bylaws as well, which address basically diameters and types of trees that can't be removed. So those are two tools that go to protect undisturbed shoreline.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I see another question here from Jim O'Shea. Does resource-based recreational use still apply to new development and redevelopment?
So I think that's speaking to, in the 2006 version of the growth plan, waterfront development was typically had to demonstrate that it was resource-based. The most recent version of the growth plan does still speak to resource-based development in rural areas. It does, I think it's added a little bit more criteria around it. So when it is a resource-based recreational use, it limits those to tourism related and recreational uses. And it has to, has to be a commercial use that meets the needs of visitors, and where appropriate, it has to, it could be like seasonal accommodation for that area as well. So it does still speak to it, but not in the way that it used to. Okay. Any other questions?
If people come away from the meeting and think, oh, I wish I had asked that question, we do have an email address that I will put up at the end of the meeting. Feel free just to send us an email and we will get back to you with.
Yeah, we have had one more come into the chat, and then I see Ian's got his hand up as well. So in the chat we have, in terms of natural heritage protection, is it up to each municipality to undertake their own initiatives? As an example, that of the city of Mississauga, speaking to the natural heritage and forest strategy that is undertaking inventories to ensure that cultural and heritage features are duly inventoried for future municipal asset identification, and protection of features are duly noted in order to mitigate any future impacts of climate shifts, or does this fall within the M&R jurisdiction? Anybody feel like tackling that one?
Yeah, that's a doozy. I would say something like that obviously revolves a little bit around funding. There would be absolutely nothing that would preclude a municipality, if they want to undertake that type of work. And then, obviously, lots of times there's provincial funding initiatives that come available to look at some of these things, and municipalities can apply for some of that funding if they have a proposal. So if it's something that you're interested in for your particular municipality, it might be something that you want to bring forward or identify for them, and if try engage their interest, or if funding becomes available, it's on their radar, at least, that they may be interested in pursuing something like that. But I don't think it's not something obviously on a broader county level, because our jurisdiction is so enormous. It would be a huge funding proposal for us to undertake something of that magnitude at the county level, but at the township level, it could be more focused on a particular lake or a particular area if that municipality was interested. Anybody want to add to that?
I think you've covered it. I know that we do have a little bit of encouraging language in the OPs. It's more for settlement areas though, not necessarily in the broader rural area. So if municipality want to, they can go and conduct like an urban forest strategy or something like that if there is particular areas within their settlement areas that they want to protect.
Yeah.
That's the direction we've given for those situations.
I've been reminded too that Cabmonaghan Township a few years ago, just as an example, on their own initiative, they completed a cultural heritage inventory. So again, it was a local initiative for something that was important to their municipality. Ian, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. I guess I wondered for parts of the county that are drowned lands, what is the zoning or the official plan designation proposed for that? And does that, or is it really just an extension from the land-based portion out to cover the lake? Although there could be different designations on different sides of the lake. So I'm just wondering how drowned lands applies, because there is a fair bit in some parts of the county, due in particular to the Trans-Severn Waterway.
Yeah, so to be honest, I would have to look at our mapping and see if it's been captured in a specific designation. But that's something I can definitely get back to you on.
Just clarifying a point that you made, Ian, one of the things that we're doing through the development of the OP and the fact that it's going to be provide the local content for 7 out of our 8 municipalities, one of the things that we've tried to do is create some uniformity in the designations. So, you know, as it exists right now, you could look at Stony Lake as an example. There may be different designations in around the lake, because I think there's about 3 municipalities that front onto Stony. So we've come up with a consistent naming for designations that would be applicable across all the townships that are involved in the county official plan. So as you go from one municipality to the other, there's a consistent look in the mapping and a consistent naming. So whether people are looking at doing projects in a number of those municipalities, there's consistency in how it looks and how to read the plan.
Right.
So I've recorded that question, Ian, and I'll have a look and get back to you.
Okay, so I see another new question in the chat. Given that this OP will be used at the local level, is it not important to define or include some of the points above that you said would have dealt with at the local level? And I guess that's regarding the strategy.
Yep. So we do have some policy, particularly around the cultural heritage piece that does direct that it is a municipal responsibility. Yeah, like Ian said before, there's nothing preventing a municipality from going ahead and producing any of these things. Depending on what the strategy is and what it covers, it may or may not necessitate an official plan amendment to further implement those policies. Okay. I'm not seeing any additional questions. So as Brian said, that we do have that email address, newcountyop@ptbocounty.ca. If you have any other questions, Again, we're going to be having a meeting again next week. So if we're not kind of keeping the questions strictly related to what the presentation was about. So if you do want to have it answered in person or virtually in person, feel free to just ask it either in advance of the next meeting or just at the next meeting if you plan to attend. So with that, Brian and Ian, do you have any other
I was just
messages?
gonna, first of all, thank everybody for their attendance today. The time is a little bit awkward, but we're trying to get those that are working and then those that maybe have to go out to work. So thank you very much for participating with us during this time. And I wonder if, if you'd be able to just let people know again, once again, what next week's topics are. There's also a chat. Will we be notified when maps are available? Maps are available right now on the website, and they're broken down by each township.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like any revisions to the mapping that will come in a big push out. So if your name is already on our notification list, you'll get a direct email, or if you subscribe to our website, that'll be pushed out through there as well. So yes, I guess the answer is yes, you will be notified. And then next week's meeting is, I think we're covering a number of different things. We've got aggregate resources, water resources, transportation and infrastructure. And then on April 7th, we are going to be reviewing our growth analysis. And there's a few other pieces in that section, in the growth management section of the draft OP that we'll cover off too, that just talks about housing and that kind of thing. So those are for the next two meetings. Yeah, other than that, thank everybody so much for coming tonight. We appreciate the feedback and the input and the interest in the project. So have a great rest of your night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.